Lithuania was one of the Socialist Republics of the Soviet Union until its fall in 1991. Vilnius, its capital, is a beautiful city and even more so around this time of the year, combining the past and the present, with several parts of it reminding us of its communist history. One of them, the regional KGB headquarters. Welcome to Spy Spots. If you watched our Spy Spots episode 20, where we visited the former headquarters of AVH in Budapest, Hungary, which was operating under KGB's guidance, you'd be surprised by the resemblance you'll see in our today's episode. Overall, KGB had an almost identical setup for its regional headquarters and those of her sister agencies, like AVH in Hungary. So today we'll talk about this imposing historical building located literally at the heart of the capital. This building was completed when Lithuania was part of the Russian Empire in 1890 to house the regional court. In the First World War, the German Empire occupied Lithuania, and after gaining back its independence, the Lithuanian military made this the regional headquarters. Later, the Bolsheviks took it over as their office for the commissaries, as well as a revolutionary tribunal. Then, when Poland invaded, it became a court of justice under the Polish occupation. Now, with the Second World War, the Soviet Union invaded Lithuania and used this as a prison. However, the Germans managed to take control in 1941 and housed here their secret police, known as Gestapo. Subsequently, the Soviets, in 1944, took back the control of Lithuania, turning the country into a Soviet republic. From 1944 and until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, this was the regional headquarters of the KGB. And almost immediately after Lithuania gained its independence, specifically in 1992, this building became the Museum of Occupations and Freedom Fights that is operational to this day. Literally on its walls outside we read, "During the occupations of the 20th century, the following repressive bodies operated in this building: the Gestapo and the KGB. The genocide of the population was planned here. Citizens of Lithuania were imprisoned, interrogated, tortured, and killed. And all around it you'll find names of people that were detained, or worse, in this building." Just like in today's regional headquarters of the Russian FSB, the Soviet KGB offices, like this, weren't expected to have long-term prisoners. The people were held for days, maybe a few weeks, in order for the KGB interrogators to get confessions, or in some rare cases, execute them. Nowadays, the entrance to the museum is on the side, here if you look at it from the top. And on its basement, the museum has the KGB prison, still almost intact from the Cold War era, as the museum describes it. On June 15, 1940, the Soviet Union marched its troops into the territory of the state of Lithuania and thus began the occupation of the country. From the very first day of the occupation, the systematic demolition of the foundations of the Lithuanian statehood began, alongside the prosecution and arrest of peaceful residents. The normal rhythm of life was replaced by days of tension and anxiety. In autumn 1940, the Vilnius board of the NKVD was set up in the former courthouse, and a prison, remand prison, was put in the basement. The prison cells are still just as they were found in August 1991, when the KGB left Lithuania. Today, they look nothing like they did when the freedom fighters and dissidents were imprisoned and tortured there, starting in the 1940s. The prison was repainted and repaired numerous times. As many as 18 layers of paint have been uncovered, and the number of prison cells was reduced from more than 50 cells in 1964 to 23 and later 19. However, its bleak, cold dungeons allow us to at least partially imagine the fate of the people who were imprisoned there. This is the photography and fingerprinting room where the detainees were booked. The duty officer's room. The museum states that the central monitoring console there is from 1975. The guard room with the uniforms of a KGB lieutenant and senior lieutenant hanging on the rack. This was the body search room, where detainees were stripped down and searched. The solitary confinement cell, or those tiny cells, more like boxes that were introduced in the 1960s. Or the padded cell with a straight jacket, where resisting prisoners were placed. And several other cells which at first glance might seem more spacious, but according to the museum, 15 detainees were held in a cell like this. This cell displays bags of shredded KGB documents. And this is what the cells looked like from the 1960s to the 1980s. And that's a water cell that the museum describes as prisoners had to either stand on ice water or on ice in the winter, or balance on a platform. As soon as they fell asleep, they fell into the water. The water cells were installed around 1945 and taken out in the 1950s. And as you step outside, you have the exercise yard, which, depending on the era, it was an area where prisoners were allowed to walk from 15 minutes a day up to more than an hour in the more recent years. However, the entire place was heavily guarded, with tall walls, so that prisoners cannot be seen or communicate with the external world. Again, depending on the era, prisoners were either not allowed to talk or make sounds at all, or later on, talk but very quietly. The museum also has this exhibition from the time of 1941 to 1944, when the building was the home of the Gestapo, the German secret police. The darkest part of this museum is, undoubtedly, the execution chamber. Until the dissolution of NKVD in 1946, which was succeeded by the KGB, there was something called the NKVD Troika. That was an almost informal judicial process which could, for certain types of crimes, to punish people to death sentence without further hearings. After 1946, this was passed to judicial authorities, but throughout its existence as a Soviet facility, according to the museum, over 1,000 individuals were shot in this execution chamber. The executors were part of a highly classified special unit of officers that belonged to Section Alpha, and the executions were done almost always at night. This way, they could move the bodies behind a wooden partition and use a lorry to transfer them, under the cover of the night, to the burial location. Overall, this is a large museum, so of course we won't be covering everything in detail. After all, this episode aims to inspire you to visit it, not to replace this visit. That said, most of the second floor of this massive building was occupied by KGB's Operational Technical Department. Today we'd call this the Signals Intelligence. It is where the unit was wiretapping phone lines, intercepting communications and so on. And the following exhibition presents how the Soviet Union was suppressing any armed resistance attempts, followed by another exhibition dedicated to resistance fighters. In there we also find some spy radio sets that resistance groups were using. On the top right you see a British Mark 122, and on the bottom a CIA-provided RS-1 spy radio set. The exhibition that is closest to our area of interest is this, of course, about the time that this was the KGB regional headquarters. Those are templates from documents used for agent operations. A was to list the secret locations used for clandestine meetings. B, to list the control meetings with an agent. And C, a list of agents and reliable persons that received the flat for clandestine meetings. This is an agent receipt, expense claim form, an agent report, and so on. In general, people unfamiliar with the intelligence space are usually amazed with the amount of documentation and writing that it involves, even today, but this is a good example of that aspect. And there is more, and more, more, and some more, and yes, even more, but we'll stop here. You get the idea, and believe it or not, most of those also exist today in intelligence agencies, but of course in a digital form. Then we have KGB training material for disguises. All the people pictured here are KGB officers disguised for operational purposes. Covert surveillance devices. Of course, including the IX-12 KGB spy camera that we've also presented in the spy collection before. Blank birth certificates that were used to build cover stories for KGB officers operating abroad. A toolkit for installing eavesdropping equipment. Infrared and ultraviolet radiation devices used by KGB to detect cryptograms and various chemical substances. Covert listening devices manuals. A collection of samples of handwritten anti-Soviet messages that KGB was collecting for tracking and identification purposes. All sorts of stamps. And, as always, hotels and espionage have a very close relation, and here you see a once secret KGB list of all of the foreigners that stayed at the Gintaras hotel in Vilnius in the period of 1975 to 1976. Actually, if you'd like to experience staying at this hotel today, a hotel that was once used by KGB to spy on its foreign guests, it's in the old town of Vilnius, and after several changes and renovations, today it's operating as the Hotel Panorama. Back to the KGB section of the museum, those are books of KGB wanted people, various types of records, even guides for training KGB officers on portraits, identification, and criminal investigations. And this was the telephone that the original KGB head or his secretary had, providing them direct connection with all the chiefs of the various KGB divisions. Next we have this for all the Lithuanians that were deported to various parts of the Soviet Union. It's estimated that 39,000 of them were deported in the period of 1941 to 1953. Those are KGB document copying devices. You place the document on the board, lights on the side provide good illumination, and the camera on the center photographs them. There are a few more former regional KGB headquarters that are now museums, which we'll be covering in future episodes. But if you have the opportunity to visit the beautiful city of Vilnius, this is a very important site that you have to experience on your own. Take your time through each of the mentioned exhibitions, and in a few hours, you'll learn so much about Lithuania and the hardships the country went through in recent history. Even more so, you'll see firsthand some of the KGB tradecraft and activities from the Cold War era, and all of them combined create an unforgettable learning experience. After all, a Spanish philosopher, George Santayana, famously said in his Reasons in Common Sense first volume, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." So don't miss this learning opportunity that clearly reminds us how nothing is as it seems.